I'm not lying about this." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Tiffany was one. One. I saw others, too. Woman after woman you paraded in front of me. You think I forgot? You think I'd forget even one of them?" I winced. It was a stretch to say I didn't have a lot of things to be ashamed of, but that petty revenge had been the most selfish. Fake. All of them. I took them out, made sure you saw, took them home. I was a perfect gentleman with every single one. You thought I'd betrayed you in the worst, most unthinkable way. You had an excuse for the things you did, and while I was angry enough to want to hurt you, I could never make myself betray you fully. Not like that. She studied my face, eyes moving desperately over every inch, seeking a lie, almost hoping for it. She didn't find one. I was closer by then, but that didn't work in my favor. She lost her mind, hitting, scratching, attacking me with blind determination and absolute abandon. It was awful. I had to subdue her bodily, carry her inside. I pinned her struggling to the bed because I thought that she might hurt herself. I was holding her down, trying to calm her, my voice soothing, as composed as I could manage. But make no mistake, I was affected. By her pain, by my own, shaken by it, trembling with it. Nothing seemed to help. I was at my wit's end when I asked her in dismay, "Did you want me to be with other women?"
"Of course not!"
she almost screeched at me.
"No, you don't get it at all. Don't you see, though, that it's so much easier to forgive your sins than it is to forgive mine? Do you think I needed another score against myself? Do you think I don't hate myself enough?"
I did understand something about that. Self-hatred was an old familiar friend, and this night was rife with it. I shut my eyes, touching my forehead softly to hers. She allowed me to for a moment. "We'll get past this," I told her tenderly. "We'll work through it all. The worst is past." That had her struggling anew. I was so caught off guard by it that she was up and across the room before I could react. I'd barely risen from the bed when she slammed the bathroom door closed, and I heard it lock. "Well, fuck." I knocked and asked her nicely to come out. She ignored me. I offered through a clenched jaw if she'd prefer that I break the door down.
"Fuck you,"
she called back, the last word a sob.
"I'm directly on the other side. If you break it down, you'll hurt me."
Well, fuck. Even when she was near hysterical, she understood well how to stop me in my tracks. Because I was good at it, I quickly resorted to dirty tricks. It only took me a minute to walk down the hall, snatch our sleeping kitten from its favorite spot, and carry it back to the bedroom. I sat with my back to the bathroom door, the still sleeping kitten cradled against me. I could feel her on the other side of the door, her body propped up against it. "Diablo is trying to get to you," I told her. "She's crying. She misses you." Her voice came muffled and forlorn. "No, she's not. I'd hear it if she was. She's so sad, Tiger. Baby wants her mama." For some reason, that set her off sobbing the hardest of all. I turned, leaning my forehead against the door. Sometimes it felt like my whole life was this, waiting on the other side of the door from her, hoping to be let in. Diablo was awake by then, rubbing up against my stroking fingers and purring loud enough that I wondered if Scarlet could hear her through the wall. "She's really upset, Tiger," I tried again. "Don't you want to at least check on her?" "You're mean," she called back, sounding like a forlorn child. It made my heart turn to a tender pile of mush in my chest. "My white flag is up, Tiger. I won't say one more upsetting thing tonight if you'll just unlock the door." "It's not you I'm worried about," she said, dread in her voice. Wasn't that the damn truth? I can take it. What I can't take is a locked door between you and me. Come on, Angel, let me in. Diablo was a good wing kitten. Suddenly and loudly, as though she'd just realized Scarlet was close, she let out a loud and plaintive meow, and then another. Slowly the door opened behind me. She leaned down, plucked Diablo from my arms, and moved away, not toward the bed, but to the chaise in the corner. She sat down, not looking at me, and restlessly stroked her hand over the kitten's fluffy coat over and over. I thought that was the end of it, but our demons were not finished with us yet. I rose, was about to move to her, when she said, voice low and accusing, "I should have had a choice. You should have given me a choice." I didn't have to clarify what she was talking about. I knew. I fucking knew. And just like that, I was furious again.
"A choice?"
I asked her bitingly.
"Yes. You had choices. You could have told your mother to go to hell, consequences be damned. I didn't have that privilege." Privilege? You're going to call that a privilege? To go to fucking prison? That's what you wanted. That was never an option. I would never have allowed that, and you fucking know it. Look at what you did allow. Was that any better? I'd have taken prison over what you let her do to us. That's a fact. No. I felt my head shaking over and over. She was about 2 sentences away from me losing my temper. I felt rage taking over and told myself to walk away, but I just couldn't do it. We had to fucking have this out. Not an option. Not a fucking option. "I should have had the choice," she repeated. I pointed an unsteady finger at her, upper lip quivering with fury. This is why I couldn't tell you. I'd have taken the fall for this. It was a solution I could have stomached. But you stubborn... She curled my lip at me. "What? Say it." "Would you have let me take the fall for you?" I knew the answer. I'd always known. Her stubborn pride had ruined us both. I could tell she wanted to lie, just for the sake of winning this argument, but she couldn't do it. She was too righteously furious for that. "Of course not. Never. I would never have stood by and let you take the fall for something I had done." My eyes were wild, screaming at her. "See?" I was shouting now. "This was why you didn't get the choice. I know you, and I knew what you would do. If you can't forgive me for that, I don't know what to do, but I still don't see that I had another way. I won't apologize for protecting you, the only way I knew how." She knew I didn't. I could see it in the resigned eyes she turned on me. Even she, the mother of all grudge holders, could only hold a grudge for so long. "I'm tired of hating you," she said quietly, a world of regret in it. "When all my heart has ever needed is to love you." Those words were so very hard for her, I could tell, and the next ones were harder. "For helping me survive for so long. For going through hell with me and getting me somehow to the other side of it intact. I will learn to forgive you. Even with all of the ways you've destroyed me, I could never forget all of the ways you've saved me, Dante. You saved me too. Never forget that either." "And destroyed you," she said the words lightly, but they held all the weight in the world, for both of us. I smiled, and it was so bittersweet that she had to look away. "Yes, broken, destroyed, but now saved again. It's enough for me. You are. You always were. I have many demons, but only one angel." Now the problem, of course, was that she had to learn to forgive herself. We both did. It was later. We were in bed, and she was tucked securely against my chest. When I spoke, it was a quiet whisper into the night.
You learn more about someone when you're fighting them than you do loving them. Things you can only learn from war. We know each other in ways we wouldn't have. Maybe it wasn't all in vain. I love you in more complex ways than I did before. I understand you more intimately. You're a fool, she said forlornly into my chest. I know, Tiger. Believe me, I know. I love you for it. I know, Angel. That too.
Chapter 35. Terror made me cruel. Emily Bronte. Past. Scarlet. It was almost nonsense to me, what he was saying. I only caught snippets, broken off sentences, half phrases, but my numb brain slowly put it together. He was ending things. The conversation only lasted minutes, mere minutes, to take everything I held sacred and tear it open, rip out the insides, and smash them under his heel. When he was finished, I felt diminished, like I was nothing, like I always had been. I should have not been so surprised. I should not have been surprised at all, really. The only real mystery here was that he'd ever tried to love me in the first place. Even so, my pain was breathtaking. I was inconsolable, and he did not even try to console me. He said his piece and hung up the phone. It was devastating, life-changing. When you have felt like nothing with that much certainty, you never come back from it. Even if you manage to piece yourself up, a part of you always stays in the gutter where you were left. Always. It was a live-or-die moment. A get yourself off the ground or stay down and let this end you event. Walk away and leave him behind, or stay and let this kill you. Kill yourself, just to see if he'll bleed out with you. I always thought I was too strong to be broken by anything. I always told myself that, at least. But love changes you. No matter how strong you are, it makes you stronger. No matter how weak you are, it makes you weaker. No matter how hard you are to conquer, it will bring you to your knees. A part of me held on to a small bit of denial. For days, I held on to it. I couldn't get out of bed, but I held on. It couldn't be real. It had been Dante's voice, but it hadn't been him. An imposter had broken me. Somehow Dante would make it right. I was holding on to that delusion for dear life when I started receiving the texts, one after another. The first was only words, short and to the point. This is Tiffany. Dante and I are getting married. Just thought you should know before it's announced publicly. He would like Graham's ring back. I was still staring at that bit of evil when the next message came in. Oh, and I thought you should see these. Enjoy. What followed was a furious flow of picture texts, one after the other, all showing roughly the same thing. Him with her. My God. Her. Tiffany? Turns out it was right there in our foundation all along. The thing that would break us. Her? The intimacy of it is what killed me. He was supposed to be mine, inarguably, irrevocably. Every part of him, inside and out, belonged to me. I'd never seen him so much as touch another girl's hand. And there he was, in picture after picture, sprawled on his back, being straddled, hands on her slender, naked hips. That's what felt like the biggest betrayal, that he'd hidden it so thoroughly from me, this other side of him, that his devotion to me could be nothing but a lie. And just like that, the delusions, the denial, were gone. I won't deny it. Those pictures broke me, took something precious inside of me and left a hollow shell behind. I did some terrible things after, unforgivable things, because I was lost, broken, and afraid. Nate was just too easy of a mark, too convenient, too perfect for my purpose, which was, of course, revenge. He came to me, flew all the way out to LA just to comfort me. I let him, or at least let him try, let him go through the motions, hugging me, holding me, whispering reassurances. I let him think he seduced me. I let him think that I wanted him back as much as he wanted me, that I cared, that I was even capable of feeling, that anything he said or did or felt got through to me. Nothing did, but I must have faked it convincingly enough. I let him think that I loved him. I let him think that I would marry him. I did it all for one reason, an obvious, vengeful one. Nate was in the shower when I intercepted a call for him from Dante. I was feeling particularly hateful when I answered it, with a purring, "Hello, Dante." Silence on the other end. That was fine. I had enough to say for both of us. "Nate's in the shower. He's not like you. He doesn't like to wear his sex. Always has to get cleaned up right after. Can I take a message for you?" He managed to make out some word-like noises. Something like, "Don't. No. Please no." Too late. We did. Many times. Did he tell you? He proposed. I said yes. You're not invited to the wedding. Oh my God. What did you do, Scarlett? What did you do? I shuddered at the awful, anguished sound of his voice. I could feel his pain, reaching out across the distance, over the miles that separated us, moving north to south, east to west, racing over mountains, across roads and through cities, flowing down from him to me. It pounded out to me until it felt like my own pulsing hurt. Every gory bit of us was strewn and twitching in the space between us. I think that's pretty obvious, I managed to get out. Do you want me to spell it out for you? Would you like me to send pictures? You're heartless, he told me, sounding like he couldn't quite believe it, like he thought I would deny it. I did not. Of course I am. Did you think I wouldn't be? You were my heart, and you left. The sounds he made then were almost comforting in their familiarity, anguished, desolate noises that matched perfectly just how I'd felt since he'd left and taken not just my heart, but my soul with him. So he wasn't over me. He still felt something. It was humiliating how relieved I was. I needed him to feel, needed him to hurt, needed his wounds to throb in time with my own, needed to bring him to my hell. At least then I would not be alone here. A small distinction, but a real one. So I couldn't have him. At least I would still have the satisfaction of knowing that we suffered together. And what about you, Dante? I finally managed to choke back at him. Where did your heart go? You still have it. He lobbed it at me like an accusation. The bastard. And you can keep it, he continued, voice ragged, breath uneven. But I'm finished with you. Finished! We are done! And that was that. As he'd said, we were finished. Of course we were. We were beyond all repair. I broke it off with Nate. He'd served his purpose. I wasn't kind about it. I didn't tell any pretty lies to soften the blow. I'd never loved him. I didn't want him. No, it had not been good for me. I'd only slept with him to hurt somebody else. A week after I sent him from my sight, I got a call from Nate's mother. He was in the hospital. He'd tried to kill himself with a bottle of pills. He'd live, but he was a mess. She blamed me as much as I blamed myself, and told me to stay the hell away from her son. I was only too happy to comply. Relieved was an apt word for it. And so it went. I became completely rootless for a very long time. and I hated Dante with what little there was left of my heart. Chapter 36. Your task is not to seek love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Rumi. Present. Scarlet. I should have never brought it up. Okay, I didn't. It wasn't like it was a choice. Nate called me while I was in the bathroom. I'd left my phone out on the bed. Dante saw. It was bad. Worse than rage, though that was there. It hurt him, wounded him deeply that I was in contact with his old friend. You know what happened after I broke it off with him? I told him, attempting to explain myself. I was on a warpath after we ended, and I wasn't just callous with him. I was cruel. I feel bad for him. At Graham's funeral, he said he wanted to start talking again, as friends, and so I agreed. What happened between me and him, I said falteringly. You shouldn't take out on him. It was me. I'd have done anything back then just to get your attention, just to hurt you how I was hurting. He was shaking his head, lip curled in disgust. No, bullshit. Did you know I sent Nate to you to comfort you? He was supposed to help you because I couldn't. Instead, he took advantage. I'll never forgive him for that. My God, I hadn't known that. Just when you think a thing can't be worse, some new evil is added into the mix, just for panache. Story of my life. I won't stand for it. You need to stop talking to him. His voice was clipped, curt to the point of being rude, demanding to the point of ordering. Cut off all contact, immediately. I opened my mouth to argue with him, just on principle, I suppose. Instinctual contrariness. But then I stopped myself. He was right. If we were going to work, there were some things you couldn't take back. People you couldn't have around. Reminders that you couldn't keep close, not for any reason. It took one insanely jealous person to be sensitive enough to understand another. Fine, I said carefully. I made the mistake of thinking that was the end of it, but it seemed fated to be one of those days. The phone call had started it, set the tone, and after that we were just at each other's throats, thin-skinned and feeling destructive. It was some random dig he made over some silly thing that had me taking it a step too far, delving into things I wasn't ready for. God, can't you ever just say you're sorry? For anything? I asked him heatedly, but more than temper, there was pain in it. You want apologies? I see. What exactly should I apologize for? Tell me, Tiger, please. Where would I even begin? Hello, temper. Again. Because every sentence out of his mouth held something in it. Some bit of appeal that was the apology in itself. That told me he was sorry for everything. That somehow he'd taken it all on himself. Added it to his cursed martyrdom. And I was supposed to have known it. I'll apologize for anything you ask, he said quietly. But that's not the issue. What you're missing is not my contrition, and I think you know it. I waved him off. You're blowing things out of proportion. You need to find your faith in us again, he said with quiet intensity. And just like that, he had me. I'd gone from annoyed and argumentative to sad and desolate. I don't know, I said, voice raw with the helplessness of it. His eyes softened, and just like that, I was in his arms. We were out on the back porch, and he sat down in one of the loungers, cradling me on his lap. He stroked a hand over my hair, then again. Do you remember when my touch used to comfort you? Do you remember when it brought you peace? I couldn't even speak, my eyes closed. I remembered too much. It filled my whole being, the remembering. Eventually I nodded, but not before rogue tears were seeping past my eyelids. I can be ruthless. His voice was quiet and vehement. I can be mean. I can be jealous and wrathful. I have a hellish temper. Whisper soft, his fingers traced over my tears. We both know this too well. There have been times where I was so angry with you that I didn't think I ever wanted to set eyes on you again. He paused, just stroking and stroking my hair, his touch tender and steady, and it seemed he wanted some response from me. Finally, I nodded. He continued, I can be manipulative, and I know I've done some things you don't agree with, things you don't understand, things that sorry does not and will not cover. I know that at times your faith in me has been lost. For some reason, one tiny, hapless sob escaped me at his last sentence, and he paused for a moment, comforting me, before he continued. But search your heart, Angel, and tell me, and yourself, if you believe that any of my actions, no matter how messed up or misguided, no matter how unforgivable they may have been, ask yourself, do you truly believe that any of the things I did weren't for you? We can disagree on my methods, but do you have any doubts that what I did to protect you? I didn't answer, just let him rock me and stroke me, wipe my tears and comfort me. All the while I was doing as he said, searching through my ravaged heart. Find the answer to that question, and you'll find your faith again. I'd had my eyes closed for a long time, but when I opened them, I found him doing something that helped me to see the truth. He was rubbing the chain around his neck, rolling the key and rings between his fingers. Graham's ring had been added, over and over, like it was a very old habit. For the first time in years, I let my hand cover his, let the pad of my index finger trace over the objects, let it linger on them, remembering them. His shoulder jerked as he shook off a shudder. You get it. I know you do. You never took them off, even at the worst of it. You kept them on as reminders. Touchstones, yes. They helped to calm me, and they helped me remember what we were, what we're supposed to be, that no matter what, we'll find our way back to each other. I was crying, but so was he. No matter what, I agreed quietly. I'd been so blinded by my own hurt and fear for so long where he was concerned. But when I let go of my doubt, my pain, my insecurity, I really did know him. His soul was mine and always had been. I couldn't deny that if I tried, now that the truth was out. Chapter 37. If all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. Emily Bronte. Past. Scarlet. Hollywood parties were the worst. I hated them, had relegated them to one of the more miserable parts of networking in Tinseltown. A necessary evil that had to be borne with a big fake smile and plenty of liquor. This one was being thrown in one of the trendy new clubs in Hollywood. It was a big space, surprisingly well lit for a den of iniquity, and it was full to the brim with people I needed to meet. I was still taking it all in, scoping out the best place to mingle/network. My bored eyes swept across the room for maybe the third time as I tried to decide where I wanted to spend my energy and charm, when they landed on a pair of cold eyes that I had not expected to see again. Eyes that were more familiar even than my own. I froze, drink halfway to my parted lips. No, oh no, please. Not now. I haven't had a moment to pull myself together. It's not fair. He's not allowed to see me first, to catch my initial reaction, because it would surely be the most telling. I blinked, recovered, then took a long drink. It had been well over a year since I'd seen him, and the things that had occurred since our last parting, and now I couldn't even stand to glance at him across a crowded room. But some part of me, the lovesick, pathetic part that I'd have cut out of myself if it were possible, rejoiced at the sight of him. And the way he looked then, it was something to behold. There was a woman clinging to him, a beautiful black-haired woman, and as I studied her, I realized it was an actress. No one terribly famous, more of an up-and-comer who is talked about often in the industry of late. Her name was dropped in a lot of gossip rags for potential roles, but nothing she'd done had panned out in a big way yet. Still, she was certainly more famous than I was, no contest. And he'd come here with her. It was clearly the most hurtful scenario he could dream up. Well, close to. Tiffany would have been the most hurtful, obviously. Always. The actress was, of course, young and lovely. Wearing a clingy red Versace dress I could remember ogling in this month's Italian Vogue. She was fashionable and beautiful and would likely be the next it girl, and Dante barely seemed to notice that one of her perky little tits was trying to permanently meld itself into his bicep. Of course, the too good-looking for his own good Durant heir could have any woman he set his sights on. I'd never had any doubts about that. His eyes were on me, his body stiff, his fists clenched as he watched me like we were the only two people in the room, and just the sight of me had stopped him in his tracks. I smiled. Maybe there was some fun yet to be had in this misery trip down our fucked-up memory lane. I could do this. I could suffer through this pain if it was for the sake of making him suffer with me. Ah, love, isn't it grand? I finished my drink and tore my eyes from his, seeking my date for the night. Justin was a screenwriter who had developed a pretty devoted crush on me when I'd first moved to town. He got me into all of the parties I hated to attend but could never say no to. In exchange, I'd been stringing him along rather relentlessly. I spotted him doing a line off the bar, a scant 10 feet away. He was still wiping his nose when I finally caught his eye. I called him over with a crook of my finger. He blinked a few times, swallowed hard, and came to me looking hopeful enough to stir some pity in me. Not enough, but some. He was very cute, tallish and trim, but muscular, with nerdy glasses that only seemed to add to his boyish handsomeness. "Darling, something's come up," I purred at him, grabbing the lapels of his jacket and moving our faces close. "I've got to run." He looked confused, but didn't ask questions and didn't try to stop me. He was my favorite kind of man, the kind that let me do whatever the hell I wanted without protesting. He was just happy to be along for the ride. Until, of course, I left him on the side of the road, as I inevitably would. I pressed my chest to his and gave him a brief, warm kiss. It stirred nothing in me. Hardly anything did these days. It was a show, no more, but I could tell as I pulled away that he'd taken something from it that he shouldn't have. I'd given him hope. "When will I see you again?" he asked me. I wanted to pat him on the head, the poor guy, but I just pursed my lips and shrugged. "Who knows? I'll text you sometime, or you can call me when there's another good party." I walked away from him and headed straight for my real target. It was pure misery to walk toward Dante, to make my body move closer to him instead of away, but at least there was some gratifying thrill to be had in the way he looked at me. That little kiss had done the trick, taken him from incensed ex-lover to enraged mess. Perhaps I'd win this round after all. His date had stepped away, to network, no doubt, and so it was easy to move right up to him. I strutted close, not stopping until I was a mere foot away, going straight for the kill. He was here to mess with me, so I'd mess right back. And I happened to be better at making messes than he was, if I did say so myself. I looked up into his face, letting every bit of the spite, the pure, concentrated hatred in my eyes pour out to him.
"If I were you, I'd stay far away from me," Dante warned.
The way his voice quavered, the weakness in him, the unchecked violence in every line of his body was nothing but blood in the water. I stepped closer with a smile. "You're not me." It was that simple and that devastating. We were not one anymore. We were two very separate people now, with little to connect us. And it was all his fault. I was not done making him pay for that. Not even close. He was almost panting as I brushed my body against his. "Your date is not going to be happy about this." His voice was a low rumble, his eyes aimed over my head. At Justin, I presumed. "No, he won't be. He wants me, can you tell? He's been obsessed with me for a while now, and seeing me with you will only add to it. But I'm too curious to pass this up. What are you doing here? Are you really trying to tell me that this is a coincidence?"
"Yes,"
he lied, not even trying to convince me, his voice too full of raw emotion.
"I'm dating an actress, and she wanted me to come to one of her Hollywood parties. That's the only reason I'm here."
He said it robotically, as though he'd rehearsed the phrase, but his delivery ruined it all. I saw right through him. I believed that he was dating that actress, and I believed he'd been invited here. What I did not believe was that he hadn't known or suspected that I'd be here. What I did not believe was that he hadn't come here for me. "Did you bring your own car?" I asked him, my smile now mischievous, bordering on malevolent. "I rode with my date, so either he takes me home or someone else does." I was daring him to tell me no. I needed to see if he even had it in him. I wanted to wound myself on that knowledge, to use the sharp finality of it to cut myself free. But alas, he did not, which was why I would never be free. He didn't even answer, just grabbed my wrist and started moving, leaving his date and mine to watch on in baffled affront. We were in his car driving furiously away before I spoke again. "Where are you taking me?" I asked him. His eyes were wild, his hands clenching the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles were white.
"Does it matter?"
he finally asked. I touched a hand to his leg, and his thigh muscle jerked in agitation. "Take me somewhere outside, somewhere with a view. I want to watch the sunset while you're inside of me." I studied his face intently while I said it, saw him flinch, then harden.
"I didn't come here for this," he uttered softly.
"Well, then you're a fool. What did you come here for?" His mouth twisted so bitterly that I had to look away.
"To see you, just to look at you and see if there was still any part of you left that I recognized."
My head snapped back, and I leaned toward him, grabbing him crudely. "I found something of you that I recognize. The only part of you that I miss seems to be about the same." He tore my hand off him, flinging it away.
"How could you?"
His voice was wretched with agony as he finally got to the point, to the ugly, rotten root of it all.
"How could you?"
I felt nothing but fury at his pain. I was too wrapped up in my own.
"How could I? How could I? How could you? How could you?"
He was shaking his head over and over.
"You don't understand. You don't know anything."
"I know you were engaged to fucking Tiffany. That's all I ever need to know for the rest of my fucking life. You wanted to break me? Well, you did it. And today is your lucky day, because now you get to fuck what's left. Are you happy?" His face was flushed, his eyes blinking so rapidly that I thought for a moment that he was going to cry.
Jesus, how did it come to this? Jesus, how did we end up like this?
"If you don't know, then nobody does. Because you fucking brought us here." "I know, Angel," he whispered. "But believe me, I am not happy. If it makes you feel better, you can be sure that I will never be happy again." It was something. A few drops of cool water to dampen the inferno that lived inside of me. He had thrown me away, but at least he could never move on from me, not completely. He was no more capable of that than I was. It wasn't long before he pulled the car deep onto the shoulder and put it in park. He'd taken me to a spot that fit what I'd described. He'd found me a nice view and a bit of privacy. Despite his animosity, he'd accommodated me. I thought it was a tell of how I still affected him. It was enough for the moment. He didn't move, though. Didn't even take his hands off the steering wheel. It didn't matter. I opened the door, stepped out of the car, slammed it shut, and walked around the front of it slowly, my movements sinuous, seductive. I made my way to his side, leaning over the hood, bracing my hands as I leveled my gaze on him through the windshield. I watched his gorgeous, sinister mouth as he shaped a curse, and then my name, the sight making me smile. Not a happy smile. There was no joy to be found in this. It was the opposite. This was about killing anything inside of me that was capable of that emotion, stomping it to death under my vicious, spiteful heel, then grinding it unrecognizable with my sharpest stilettos. It was nothing new. I'd been at this for a while, and doing a stand-up job of it, if I did say so myself. His door opened, and the sound of his cursing matched the words his lips shaped. It was music to my ears. "I hope you brought condoms," I interrupted his rather creative diatribe, tone as abrasive as I could manage. "You aren't getting inside of me without." The cursing stopped, and his silence was somehow much more hostile than even that had been. The last time we'd had each other, no protection had been necessary, and the significance was not lost on either of us. The difference between then and now was more brutally apparent than ever, and if he thought his bitterness could match my own when it came to this particularly, he had a lot to learn. Finally he answered with a choked, "I brought some." I flashed my teeth at him in my most sadistic/masochistic grin. "Well then, wrap it up, lover. I don't have all night." He didn't even try to kiss me at first. I was so relieved that I didn't question it. Instead, he moved behind me, and I braced my hands against the car as I listened to the bittersweet sounds of him getting us both ready. The rustle of my dress as he pushed it up to my waist, the whisper of my panties coming down, a zipper being undone, the crinkle of a foil wrapper, the snap of a rubber rolling into place. I squirmed as I listened, but didn't move to help. I didn't want to look at him. Feeling him would be more than enough. Too much on its own. He seemed to agree, butting up against my entrance with no foreplay at all. Good. I was wet enough for him to ease inside of me. Just the idea of this hate sex did that to me. Still, the size and suddenness of him was almost painful at first. I welcomed the discomfort, leaning down to press my cheek hard against the hot metal of his car as he invaded me. I hadn't wanted this to feel good. That was not the point of this. He pressed a hand to the small of my back as he started to move heavily, his breath ragged as he pounded his rage straight into me with succinct, brutal thrusts. The brutality I welcomed. Every savage plunge in and out, every jarring contact of my hip bones against heated metal, every rough slide of my nipples against my thin dress as they rubbed into the hood of the car, my cheekbone digging in until I was sure it would bruise, my nails scoring into his perfect paint job with enough zeal to break them. All of it only added to my perverse pleasure in the damaging exchange. Hate sex at its finest. Unfortunately, it was stimulating enough to get me off and fast. I told myself it was the booze that had primed me so quickly for it. But of course I knew better. I tried to hold back, bit my lip and tensed up, but each forceful plunge in, every perfect drag out, all of the sounds he was making, the helpless moans escaping him with every desperate movement, were too much for me. I came, fast and sudden, letting out an anguished cry. He cursed, thrusting harder, faster, again, and started to come, calling out my name as though he had the right. After, I just lay there for the longest time, eyes wide open, staring out at the night while Dante draped heavily against my back, still inside of me, his mouth close to my ear. I listened to the familiar pants of his breath as they went from jagged and wild to soft and even, while we slowly recovered from the destructive encounter. Eventually he spoke. "You didn't even look at the sunset. You kept your head down the entire time." I shuddered. The bastard's casual, almost amused tone got to me. His release had helped him get his temper in hand, which had not been the point. "Get off me," I snarled at him. He didn't listen. Instead, he brushed my hair to the side and started kissing my neck, his lips tender, devastating as they began to move down to my nape, then along my shoulder. "Time's up, lover." I made my tremulous voice as hard as I could manage. "I need to get back to my date." He didn't like that. In fact, he stiffened and straightened, sliding out of me with a decisive swiftness that made me gasp. Good. His rage was back, which had been my intent. I wanted, expected, needed him to get off me then, to go away, to never touch me again. But of course that was not what he did, not even close. His big, strong, familiar, despised hands turned me over onto my back. As my torso was exposed, my body instinctively started to curl in on itself. He wasn't having it. He pinned my shoulders, moving his hips between my thighs before I could muster up the energy to maneuver away. His chest pressed to my breasts, right as his lips took mine. My hands, of their own volition, began to tug at his thigh, seeking skin even while I gasped out a ragged, "Don't kiss me." "Please," I almost said, almost begged for that one small mercy. But it would have been pointless, precious pride spent for nothing, because there was no mercy in him. Not today. He kissed me with the same fevered longing that he always had, the same despairing hope, the same passionate reverence, like nothing had changed, like we hadn't destroyed each other and ourselves with determined, spiteful abandon since our last parting. I let him have me again, and this time it was much, much worse. More than fucking or release, more than hate sex, more than masochism or revenge. It was the give and take that only occurs when the heart is involved. When the heart isn't yours to give because it already belongs to someone else. Because it always fucking did. I barely got his tie off, his shirt open, as he tugged the scant top of my dress down, dragging the thin straps off my shoulders. He took me face to face, mouth to mouth, bare chest to bare chest. It was smoother this time, with more finesse. This was not merely him consuming me. It was not just his body partaking of mine. This time he seduced as much as he owned. It lasted longer and felt better. There was more pleasure to be had within his expert, knowing touch. There was more delight to endure under his relentless, familiar body. There was more torment to suffer from his unstoppable, merciless lips. The first time had been more than enough to mess with my head for the foreseeable future, but the second time ruined me. Utterly, completely. If I'd built up any believable delusions that I could move forward from this, from him, he'd just blown them all to little, twitching, unrecoverable bits. Was there some piece of my heart left intact inside of my miserable chest before that encounter? Some tiny fragment of my soul? I couldn't remember. But I felt like nothing when he finished with me. Whatever had been left, he'd just carelessly taken. There was some trivial bit of comfort to be taken in the fact that he seemed to be as affected. He couldn't muster up the energy for a casual one-liner after that round. Instead, when he caught his breath, he wrenched out of me, staggering away, his devastated eyes making a connection with mine for a few horrible beats before he strode off, heading opposite of the road, straightening his clothes as he took some crucial moments to compose himself, giving me his back. It was a mistake on his part, because I recovered faster, or at least I got my act together quickly enough to make the first move. My only regret was that I didn't get to see his face as I drove away, leaving him stranded on the side of the road, in the middle of fucking nowhere. I'd driven about a mile before I took some pity on him, slowing the car, rolling down the driver's side window and tossing his phone out. Maybe he'd find it and get himself a ride. If I were smart, I'd have kept the car, used it for a spell. It was very nice, a brand new Audi. I could have driven around in style for a change. Even with how he felt about me now, I couldn't imagine him reporting it stolen. Still, I wanted him to report it, because I didn't keep it. I left it in an empty parking lot a few blocks from my apartment, hoping he'd somehow get it back and find the present I'd carved for him on the hood. I fucking hate you. Quit stalking me. Subtlety had never been my strength. Why try to change now? Chapter 38. There's nothing half so real in life as the things you've done. Inexorably, unalterably done. Sarah Teasdale. Present. Scarlett. We'd been living together in our love nest for a few months when it all came crashing down around us. I was resigned to being together in secret for the foreseeable future, or forever if need be. Hell, I was thankful for it. Even with the fighting, some of it horrible, messy, disastrous, some of it damn near too painful to take, I was still grateful for every second granted to us, only hoping each day that we could have another, and another. We'd never had much luck with hope. The movie was going well, scheduled to wrap up in days, and I'd just gotten into my trailer and was changing to go home when I got the call. It was an unknown number, and I automatically ignored the first few times it rang. Finally, annoyance had me answering with a curt, "Hello?" "Hello, Scarlett." I hadn't heard the voice in a while, not since Graham's funeral, and then only briefly, but I recognized it instantly. "Hello, Adelaide," I said, voice gone cold with no effort at all. I had nothing but ice in my veins for this woman. "How long did you think this could last?" she asked, poison dripping from her words. "How long did you think you could hide it from me?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said evenly and unflappably. I was an actress, after all, and there was only one person, one man to be precise, that I couldn't fake it in front of, in a pinch. "Cute, very cute. I have a man waiting for you, right outside of the gate at your studio. Get in the car. It's time we had a talk." "Not likely. Why the hell would I want to talk to you?" "Don't be coy. I'm in no mood. You'll do what I say because you know what I know, and I'm just looking for a reason to turn you in." "I don't know what you're talking about." Yes, I was still faking it for the simple reason that I didn't know what else to do. "There's no statute of limitations on killing a cop," she said, tone flat. "Dead. Go get in the car." Checkmate. I changed and left the property. I saw her car and driver right away. A man in a suit leaning against a Rolls-Royce. Yeah, no-brainer. He opened the door for me as I approached, holding out his hand.
"Your phone,"
he said without expression. I eyed him. He was middle-aged and nondescript, head to toe. Brown hair, dark shades, medium build, face deadpan. I had a very bad feeling. "Fuck you," I said succinctly, eyeing the open door narrowly. My cell started ringing. It was Adelaide again. "Do you have her?" she asked by way of greeting. "He doesn't," I said, my temper boiling. I really wanted to hit something, Adelaide's face particularly. She made a tisking noise over the phone. "Always difficult, even when you don't have a leg to stand on. Give him the phone and get into the car." "What do you want?" I was already so fed up with her that I was ready to say to hell with the consequences. It was a problem, except that my rage was almost a comfort just then, for the simple reason that the alternative was worse. If I was focused on my anger, I wasn't worrying about the fact that my life and my options had just narrowed drastically. "As I told you, I'd like to talk," Adelaide said into my ear, sounding almost reasonable, which let me know that she was full of it. "In person. I think we can work something out. I want you out of my son's life, and you want to stay out of prison. We're both motivated. This can be productive." I wasn't sure what I could have done. I felt pretty cornered, but I was saved from having to decide by the sudden and very welcome appearance of Dante. His car pulled up. He jumped out and whisked me away. I barely had time to hang up on his mother before he'd bundled me into his car and started driving away. It was over in seconds. His hands on the steering wheel were shaking. "What was that? Was that one of my mother's henchmen?" "Yes. She was trying to get me to go with him. She said she wanted to talk. She knows about us, Dante." He started cursing and did not stop until we were nearly at the house. "Were you actually going to go with him?" he finally asked incredulously. "I don't know. Maybe. She wasn't exactly giving me a choice." "Never deal with her by yourself," he told me. "Never go anywhere with her. Never engage her. If she bothers you and I'm not around, you fucking wait for me." We were home by then, and he didn't even allow me to respond. He was out of the car, on his phone, pacing. "Adelaide knows," he was saying. "Yes, she tried to grab Scarlett. Sent one of her henchmen to pick her up right outside the studio." He paused, gripping a hand into his hair. "Yes, fine. Fine. We need to figure this out and fast. We're running out of options here." He hung up and looked at me. "We need to meet up with Bastian. We've been working on some things, but we thought we had more time. Now we need to focus on Plan B. Do you want to grab anything from the house before we go?" "Where exactly are we going?" I worried about filming, but felt silly about it. What would the movie even matter if I went to jail tomorrow? "Not far. Bastian's already here, so we'll meet him at his hotel." This was news to me. So was the Plan B. And the Plan A, for that matter. We were driving again before I brought it up. "You're getting into that habit again, keeping things from me. I know you think it's to protect me, but I want to know the truth more than I want to be protected, and I think you owe it to me to start respecting that." He just nodded, mouth tight. "I do. I know it. And I'll bring you up to speed on everything tonight. If it makes you feel better, I don't even know some of it. Bastian's been doing some dirty work of his own, but he seems to think he has a solution for us." It was becoming clear that Dante had nothing on Bastian in the scheming department. It was almost impressive. One thing was for sure, they were both, without question, Durants. The hotel was only 20 minutes away. Bastian was on the top floor, and he didn't have a room. He had a penthouse suite. And he wasn't alone. He opened the door for us and led us straight into a large room with a bar. A bar and a drunk Leo. "Oh God, why is he here?" Just sort of slipped out. "Because Leo." He shot me a very unfriendly look. I returned it in spades. You can all hate each other later, Bastian said reasonably. Right now, you need to work together. Leo has some pieces of this puzzle and a vested interest in seeing justice done. Isn't that right, Leo? He glared at his favorite son. His normally styled, dirty blonde hair was sticking out all over the place, eyes squinting, his clothing askew. He looked ridiculous. I'm your dad. You're supposed to call me Dad. I arched a brow at Bastian. Oh, yeah, he seems to be in a very helpful state. Bastian grinned and shrugged. He'll sober up eventually. In the meantime, we have a whole lot of ground to cover without him. So Adelaide tried to grab you off the set? More or less, I said tensely. Dante and I still hovered at the entrance of the room, not advancing, not sitting, just standing side by side with near identical poses, arms crossed over our chests. When I realized how we'd copied each other, I almost smiled. Bastian was even more amused. He waved a hand back and forth at the two of us. Feeling a little defensive? There's no need to be. Come on in. Make yourselves comfortable. Have a seat. Have a drink. Well, he was certainly in good spirits. I sincerely hoped that meant he had some good news for us all. Dante and I looked at each other. We're fine, we said it almost in tandem. My mouth twisted wryly. Dante grinned. We'd been spending a lot of time together lately, and it was starting to show, like old times. Have it your way. Bastian waved us off. But don't say I didn't warn you. You might want to be sitting down for some of this. He took a deep breath and began. I strongly suspect, and have, since it happened, that Adelaide killed Graham, or at least had her killed. I was floored. The thought had never even occurred to me. I don't know why. No one had ever accused me of not being paranoid and suspicious, but it had still never crossed my mind. I looked at Dante and found some comfort in the fact that he looked just as floored. It's a very hard thing to prove, but I have found a lead that's given me some hope that we'll see justice done for this. There's just one small hiccup in my plan. Or there was. I think I've got a handle on her now, but you're going to have to trust me here. His wording was off, wrong somehow, but that wasn't what either of us focused on. I thought it was proven that Graham had a stroke, said Dante. Bastian's mouth twisted. It's complicated. There was extreme trauma to the back of her skull, and the coroner told us this was done post-mortem, meaning she had a stroke, fell, and hit her head, which is on its own suspect, because, according to experts, generally you fall forward, not backward. So I certainly had some questions. But said coroner has since disappeared, whether he was buried in the woods for knowing too much, or given enough money to retire to Fiji, we have not been able to figure out. Adelaide, I breathed, feeling murderous. That fucking cunt, Leo said from the sofa, where he was still drunkenly sprawled. She was never even worth the trouble. Terrible in bed. Nice contribution, Princess, I told him. Because Leo. You're a fucking... he began. No. Dante was shaking his head. Not fucking happening. Say another word to her, Leo, and see how much I don't have a problem beating your drunken ass. Leo glared at me for that. She started it. He had a point. Bastian sighed. Back to the point. I've been chasing the trail since the funeral, exhaustively. I'd just about given up hope, but then something even better came along. He smiled, and there was triumph in it. I've secured some additional insurance. For both of our issues, ironically enough. It wasn't cheap, but some things are worth paying heavily for. For some reason, his eyes were sad and on me as he said it. He cleared his throat and called out, Tiffany? Chapter 39. Enemies are so stimulating. Katharine Hepburn. The bane of my existence came striding into the room. We shifted to the side automatically, to let her by, or just make sure she didn't accidentally touch us. Take your pick. Probably both. "What is she doing here?" I asked slowly and with absolute venom. Dante's arm wrapped around me, and he gripped my shoulder firmly, preemptively holding me back, of course, because he knew me. "Hear me out," Bastian said, ever reasonable. I glanced at him. He'd earned at least some of my trust, so even with her in the room, I was willing to let him explain. I nodded my assent. Tiffany seemed particularly pleased with herself. Preening. Yes, that was the word. She was preening as she walked across the room to stand beside Bastian. Her smile grew when she laid her eyes on Dante. "Nice to see you, Dante," she began. I hated the way she looked at him, still with such warm interest, still with frank infatuation. Even knowing everything had been fake between them, I still wanted to spit at her, to shout in her face, break her nose again. I felt Dante stiffen at my back. "Fuck you, Tiffany," he growled back. Well, hell, this was all going to go downhill pretty damn fast if I was supposed to be the calm one here. Leo started giggling. "Shut up, Leo." "Shut up, Leo," Dante and Bastian both said, which almost made me smile. Leo shut up. For good measure, Bastian took away his drink and made him a cup of black coffee, ordering him to finish it. "But I like it with milk," Leo complained, sounding like a whiny child. "Shut up and drink." Even Bastian was losing patience with him. "Tiffany has kindly agreed to switch sides," Bastian explained when he was finished tending to his father, making it sound like it was the most reasonable topic in the world. "And as she has been very firmly entrenched in Adelaide's camp for many years, and holds many, many of her secrets, this is very good news for us." I glared at her. I just didn't believe it, not for 1 second. "Why?" Dante asked, sounding as suspicious as I felt. "Why would she turn on Adelaide?" He looked at Tiffany. "Why now? After all this time? After all of the vile things you've done for her?" Disgust was dripping from every word he addressed at her directly. The look she gave him was filled with vulnerable reproach, and even that made me want to do her violence. I was not okay with her looking at him with any personal thing written on her face. She wasn't entitled to any of that. I owned him and she didn't. She fucking didn't. "Since I was young, I thought I would marry you," she told him, sounding sad and sweet, and like she'd fucking rehearsed it. Dante's arm tightened around me, because he knew me. I was told I would, and I let myself want that. Let myself fall for you, always thinking you were my future. You were a promise to me. Dante had both arms around me at this point, in a firm hold disguised as an affectionate bear hug. Or maybe it was both. "You're delusional," he told her disdainfully. "Promised to me?" she repeated, tears in her eyes. "I was planning our wedding when I was 15. I even had the dress picked out, the jewelry, the shoes. Since I can remember, Adelaide promised me I'd be a Durant. You were never supposed to fall in love with her." She pointed an accusing finger at me. "And you certainly weren't supposed to stay in love with her. You were promised to me." I was about done with that. I looked at Bastian, whose steady eyes were on me. "Is there a point to this?" "Unfortunately, yes." He sounded resigned, tired beyond his years. "It is our solution. Continue, Tiffany." She sent him a teary smile. "You can call me Fanny." Barf. He didn't even roll his eyes. "Continue, Fanny." "She promised me this, and I wanted it more than anything. She held it over my head, year after year, scheme after scheme. You wouldn't believe the things I did for her. All for this promise. I was pretty sure we would, but I kept my mouth shut. I just wanted her to finish. And then it happened. I was engaged to him, but it only lasted 6 months, and it wasn't even real. Tears were pouring down her face, and silly or not, they were real. But she told me to be patient, that she'd fix that too. But he wouldn't even kiss me.
I told you then, Dante said with chilling animosity. And I'll tell you now, I was never attracted to you, far from it. Kissing you would be like kissing my mother.
She flinched, but kept talking. It's only recently that I realized that Adelaide is just keeping me on a string. She can't deliver the things she's promised me. If I want to be a Durant, I need to do it myself.
I was staring at her, my face stiff, expression filled with hate. I opened my mouth to say what I hadn't a clue, something bad, when Bastian spoke. Tiffany, he began.
Fanny, she interrupted.
He merely nodded. Fanny here knows things about Adelaide that would make your skin crawl. She's been a close confidant for quite some time. And an accomplice, Dante added.
Perhaps, Bastian agreed.
But that's beside the point. We have bigger fish to fry. Fanny is a witness, and more. She recorded Adelaide talking about Graham's death, and what she says on it is as good as a confession. At the very least, it will forever ruin her reputation. In addition, Fanny has agreed not to testify against either of you in the death of Detective Harris, which is a valuable thing, being that she personally witnessed parts of the crime. It was one of the most damning pieces of evidence Adelaide had on you, that in addition to the pictures taken, the photographer of said pictures, he waved his hand at Tiffany, was a witness in her pocket. It won't matter whether she takes Adelaide's side or not, Dante pointed out. Those pictures say enough to need an explanation. Ah, but there it is. There's no proof at all at this point that Scarlett was involved. They can prove what happened and where. Everything else is debatable, even with the pictures. All of the DNA has deteriorated by now. Anyone could have done it.
I doubt that will fly, I said. She brings those pictures in, they're going to want a culprit. And they won't have to look far beyond me.
Yes, true. But you didn't even live in that trailer at the time, correct?
Correct, I agreed, staring at him. His attention to detail was kind of scary.
Someone else lived there, he continued. Correct?
Yes, but it was just my grandma. He nodded, eyes steady on me.
And we will get to that. Step 1 is Tiffany's cooperation, and we have it. All she wants is the Durant name.
My eyes were on him when I caught it, when I saw what he was getting at. His mouth twisted when he saw he'd gotten his point across.
Yes, me. I'm a bastard, which she does not prefer, but I've still been allowed to carry the name, and so will she.
No, Bastian, I said, and I couldn't hide my horror or my weakness in the words. It was too much of a sacrifice. It was too unfair.
Yes, he countered. It's the solution to our problems. And it's better me than Dante. If I had what you had, I would not do this. I'm doing this to save what you have. I'm doing this because I believe in it, even if it's something I can never have for myself.
There was such a deep-seated sentimentality to his words. They felt so personal, and 100 things I'd overlooked clicked into place at once. Bastian had feelings for me, old and deep ones. He must have for some time, though we hadn't spent any real time together in years, and never without Dante. Dante, so that's where the resentment for his half-brother came from. Not from some family rivalry or Durant snobbery. It was always about me. I'm so sorry, I said to Bastian, and it had too many meanings for me to ever articulate.
I want you to be happy, he said simply. I want you to finally get back what was stolen from you.
That was impossible, but even so, his sacrifice was significant, life-changing, unacceptable. Don't you feel a little pathetic blackmailing someone into marrying you? I asked Tiffany. Winning doesn't make me pathetic. Jesus, some people you couldn't even insult. No, I was shaking my head. We can't let you do this. You also can't stop me. He said it with resigned bitterness. This is part of the solution that cannot be screwed up. Without Tiffany, all of the rest could easily get away from us. He had a very good point, but it was so wrong. He deserved so much better. I swallowed the bitter pill and tasted it all the way down. We have 2 confessions and a witness, he said, as though that settled it all. You should have been a lawyer, I told him. Yeah, probably, he agreed with a sad smile. It took me a minute to catch it, but then, 2 confessions? He was back to studying my face intently as he said, Yes, 2. Adelaide incriminating herself in the death of Graham, and I'm sorry I'm the one to tell you this. There's no easy way to say it, but also your grandma. I was so confused I thought I'd misheard him. My grandma? The words made no more sense to me when I said them. Yes, Glenda's going to confess to killing Detective Harris in self-defense. If Dante hadn't still been holding me, I thought I'd have needed to sit down. I doubted I was holding any of my own weight. I don't understand, I said finally. Nothing made sense. This can no longer be used to hurt you, to be held over your head, if someone else confesses to it. Glenda has agreed to confess. We worked on the story. It doesn't incriminate you in any way. You're free and clear. I realized suddenly that Dante had had no reaction to anything for quite some time. He'd known most of it. I shouldn't have been so shocked by that. Actually, I wasn't. I was still just reeling from the idea of my grandma doing something completely selfless that would help me. Why would my grandma do that? I asked no one in particular. Bastian cocked his head to the side. To help you. To keep you from being on trial yourself. He looked away, appearing suddenly uncomfortable. Again, I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you. She wanted me to, though, actually. She said she hates doing things like this herself. But she's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Late stages. Her doctor's given her 6 months to live, perhaps a little longer. She's willing to spend that time on trial, in prison, however it goes, if it means you'll be free of this burden. Again, I'm so sorry to have to tell you like this. I didn't know what to say, what to think. Why would she do that? I asked again. It didn't match up with anything I knew about her. She wants to help you, Dante said into my ear. She's sorry for the way she treated you. She stopped drinking, and while no one will ever accuse her of being a pleasant woman, she's not as awful as she used to be. She does love you, Scarlett. In her own way, she does. You did this, I said to Dante. You talked her into this. Yes, of course. But you may not believe this. It wasn't that hard of a sell. She knows more than anyone that she has some making up to do. She's feeling very mortal, and she'd like to leave this world knowing that she did some good. I was still taking all of that in, still reeling from it, when they dropped another bombshell on me. And now we come to Leo, Dante said to his father with resigned scorn. Are you sober enough to say your piece, Leo? He asked him. I'm perfectly sober, Leo said, sounding less than perfectly sober. Still, he was markedly less drunk. So, what does Leo have to add to this? I asked no one in particular when the silence had gone on too long. Leo glared at me. I glared back. The usual. I know what happened to your mother, he said, sniffing. and I was shocked to realize he was fighting back tears. "What happened to my mother?" I asked automatically, almost robotically. We'd shifted gears so quickly, information overload, and I hadn't given my absent mother a thought in years, so I wasn't really even committed to the question. Leo changed that pretty quickly. "Your father killed her. Jethro. He beat her to within an inch of her life and left her on my doorstep." "Tell her the whole fucking thing, you asshole," Dante gritted out at him. "Start at the beginning. She deserves to know it all." Leo glared at his heir, but complied. "Renee was a few years younger than me in high school. She was a freshman when I was a senior, but we went steady for a year." The childish phrase sounded silly from him. All of it did. But I didn't care. I wanted to hear. He'd effectively caught my interest. I wanted to know anything, everything I could about my mother. He waved a negligent hand in my direction. "She looked like you. Prettiest girl in school. By far. Prettiest thing in the whole town. She's still the only woman I ever loved. But I was young, and once I graduated high school, the last thing I was going to do was wait around in that podunk town. I left, went to college. I didn't forget about her, but I just sort of got distracted. That's when I met Adelaide at Harvard. She was as conniving then as she is now. She got knocked up quick. I don't even remember how, but she talked me into marrying her. I got sick of that quick, and after the first year of college, I went back home to visit. Not gonna lie, I was hoping to see Renee, to start things again. I was already planning to leave Adelaide, to divorce her as soon as humanly possible." He took a deep breath, looking around suddenly, and I think everyone in the room knew that he was searching for his usual glass of scotch. "No liquor until you finish, Dad," Bastian said, voice quiet but firm. Leo glared at him. "Long story short, I showed up, and Renee is 7 months pregnant. I was pissed. Really pissed. Especially when I found out that the daddy was that piece of trash Jethro. I didn't talk to her for a few days, but I caved pretty quickly. I still wanted her, and she was already avoiding Jethro, said he scared her. We lived together over that summer break. I was planning to take her back with me. We had a lot of plans, actually. But one day Adelaide showed up, newborn Dante in tow, and threw a fit to end all fits and scared Renee off. I was planning to fix it, to get Adelaide to leave, get the divorce and everything. But then Renee went missing. Couldn't find hide nor hair of her anywhere for 3 days. I was really worried, since she was due any day." He took a very deep breath, looking distraught, and for the first time in my life I felt sorry for the prick. It was the worst timing, but that's Adelaide's specialty. Some part of me thinks she orchestrated the whole thing. Hell, it'd be hard to convince me otherwise. She came by to my house one night and started a fight. I was so over her by then I didn't even care. I just let her go crazy. She was pulling out her hair, bashing her head and face against the wall. She was deranged, and I did try to stop her at some point. He waved a dismissive hand at Dante. She was the mother of my child, but I couldn't stop her. She beat the crap out of herself. And right at the worst of it, my doorbell rang. It took me a while to get it. Adelaide threw herself in my way. But when I finally did, I found Renee on my doorstep, beaten, bloody. I brought her inside. I wanted to call the police, an ambulance. I wanted to help her, I swear. But she was in active labor, and I just reacted, helped her deliver the baby. He pointed at me and sneered. And Renee died before I could ever make that phone call. He sighed and started looking around for his drink again. Finish the story, Dante ordered him. You can guess the rest. I wanted to call the police, I wanted to have Jethro fucking drawn and quartered. But there was Adelaide. She told me that if I called the police, she'd say I beat her, and that she'd watched me beat Renee to death, too. You know how she fucking is. She had her proof all lined up. It was a setup, all of it. All so I wouldn't divorce her. I was a wreck. A sad, terrified wreck. I agreed to everything she asked. Even got rid of the body. Took it where she told me. Did everything she said. A fucking life sentence with that cunt. Then she took the baby and left. I didn't even know what she was going to do with it. With you. But I can't say I was even slightly surprised when I found out you ended up in a dumpster. I knew that I couldn't have held up my own weight at that point. I was literally floored. Dante was all that kept me upright. It was sad, but a part of me, a big part, was relieved to hear the tragic story. At least she hadn't abandoned me on purpose. Maybe someone had wanted me. Maybe my mother would have kept me if she'd had a choice. Leo was still Leo, but I asked him anyway. I needed to know. Did she want me? Was she going to keep me? He was looking around for his drink again, but he answered quickly and absently enough for me to think it was the truth. Oh, yeah, she was real excited about you. She was a bit impulsive, but I think she'd have been a good mother. Wasn't meant to be, though, obviously. We left soon after that. I was feeling numb, but somehow okay, as Bastian walked us out. I faced him when Dante went to turn in his valet ticket. We can never thank you enough for doing this, Bastian, I said sincerely. He touched my face. Be happy with him. That's my thank you. He smiled, and it was sad. It could have been us. If you hadn't met him first, it may well have been. I couldn't have agreed or disagreed with him because I simply didn't know. My heart hadn't belonged to me since I was 10, and a beautiful blonde-haired boy had shown me that I wasn't alone in the world. I couldn't imagine another life than that. But I nodded solemnly at Bastian because it seemed to be what he wanted, and he deserved that. Did you always know? I asked Dante on the drive home. That Bastian had feelings for me? Yes, he uttered succinctly. Imagine if you had a friend or a sister that had feelings for me, and you knew it every time you saw them. It has not made things peaceful between us. Yeah, I get it. Believe me, I get it. It's just so sad, especially now. God, Tiffany. We'll fix it. One thing at a time, though. He and I will figure out something. Tiffany is conniving and ruthless. She feels no guilt, and she'd do anything to get what she wants, like my mother. But she's not that smart, or complicated. She's simple. She thinks she's good at this game, but she never sees the whole board. Sooner or later, Bastian and I will find her weakness and exploit it. God, you two are scary enough on your own. Put you together. He grinned, and it was bloodthirsty. Yes, we work well together, as Adelaide is about to find out. He sent me a sidelong glance, his hand going to my knee. Don't you feel like a weight's been lifted off you? We can live our lives again. Scarlett, we're free. I couldn't quite meet his eyes. It's time, I thought. I have to come clean now, because I didn't have one excuse to keep it from him any longer. Chapter 40. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. Robert Frost. Past. Scarlett. I'd never felt so utterly hopeless in my life. I'm not even sure how I ended up on a park bench, watching a playground full of strange children, bawling my eyes out like the world was ending. The truth was, My world had been ending for months now, crumbling to pieces around me, and I just now received the last blow, the final bit of information that I absolutely, emphatically could not handle. It was 1 month to the day I'd last spoken to Dante, since I'd destroyed us both over the phone, since I'd used Nate to make Dante bleed, to make him suffer and then callously broken up with him as soon as I was done. 4 months since I took antibiotics while on birth control and then completely forgotten that the one canceled out the other. I could barely support myself. How the hell was I going to be responsible for someone else? Not just someone else. A child. A child without a father. A child whose father had stated, plain as day, that he did not want its mother so much as calling him anymore. I was wearing shades, but even with that buffer between my eyes and the world, I knew I kept not even 1 ounce of composure. I was lost. I had no clue what to do with myself. How could I be so stupid? What was I going to do? I'm not sure how long I carried on like that, arms hugging myself as I rocked back and forth, feeling profoundly alone in the world. It felt like hours, when in reality it may have been only minutes. When I noticed the outside world again, I realized that there was a woman sitting next to me on the bench, just a few feet away, which was not unusual on its own. What was unusual was that she was crying, like me, sobbing like her heart was breaking, clutching her hands together as though in prayer. She seemed to notice me at about the same time I noticed her. She wasn't even wearing shades. Her grief laid even barer than mine. She wiped her eyes, studying me. My suffering seemed to have calmed hers, as though seeing someone else in need gave her purpose. And so it did. It was the type of meeting that imprinted itself on your memory, and looking back on it, I realized that it was indicative of her nature. Gina was a woman who always put others' needs before her own. Chapter 41. Every act of creation is first an act of destruction. Pablo Picasso. Present, Scarlet. The first time I brought Dante to Gina and Eugene's was the hardest. They greeted us at the door, and Mercy was with them, flinging herself at me with abandon. I stroked her hair and let her hug me to her heart's content, my gaze wary on Dante. The look in his eyes as he saw her for the first time broke my heart all over again. I knew what he was feeling, and I felt it with him, knew precisely what he was seeing as he took her in. Mercy was a gorgeous doll of a girl, a lovely mix of her biological parents. She had her father's blonde coloring and the same gorgeous ocean eyes, and there was no doubt where her wavy hair texture came from, her high cheekbones, her stubborn jaw, her mother. But that was all they had in common. No one called Mercy trash. No one would. No one thought of her that way. She was the opposite, in fact, and only once had anyone ever thrown her away. You never make peace with being abandoned, this I know. But we would do what we could to take responsibility for it, to never let her feel the way I had. She was loved deeply, and not just by the parents that raised her. That was a fact. Dante had known what to expect, or at least he'd had fair warning. But knowing and seeing are two different creatures, not to mention feeling. It was hard, perhaps even as hard as telling him had been. He hadn't taken either thing well. Who would? Who could? We'd had a bad few days after I told him. A few miserable moments where I wasn't sure we'd make it out the other side. Of course he resented my decision, resented that I'd made it without him, but even he knew that that was as unfair as it was natural. The night I'd told him is one I'd never forget. Neither of us would. It had been as horrible as I'd dreaded, as painful as I'd known it had to be. "How could you do that? How could you do a thing like that just for spite? He had asked when I told him, his immediate gut reaction. I'd been expecting something like that, but I was still offended, still taken from reasonable to messy with those 2 sentences. It wasn't for spite, I told him, voice quavering in something akin to dread. This conversation could ruin us. That fact was not lost on me. It was for survival. You were engaged to Tiffany when I found out. What was I supposed to do? Something awful wrote itself on his familiar features in all caps. His mouth twisted. Shame. You should have told me, he gasped out. He couldn't even look at me. His eyes were aimed up at the ceiling, blinking over and over. You should have at least told me. Jesus, how could you go through that alone? I shook harder with every word out of his mouth. How could you give our child away without even telling me? He was weeping by the end. I didn't know how, and I thought you'd reject me. Us. I was sure you never wanted to speak to me again. You know that if you'd come to me, that no matter what, I'd have helped. You know that if you'd come to me pregnant with our child, I'd have helped. God, that hurt, and I couldn't deny it. Even I, the queen of denial, couldn't choke out the words. We were in our bedroom for the conversation, and by then we were both huddled in opposite corners, crying our eyes out, and I, for one, was wondering how the hell we'd ever get through this. Of the 2 of us, Dante was by far the forgiving one. If he couldn't forgive, how could I even begin to try? But somehow we found a way. Dante made the first move, coming to me, picking me up, and carrying me to bed. We held each other as we wept until our tears ran dry, and then set about trying to heal. It would be a long journey, but if we were committed enough, I knew we could do it. We were committed enough. You need to meet them, I said eventually. When you meet her parents, you'll understand. Or at least it will help. They were there for everything, for me and for her. Her mother was the first to hold her, her father the second. It's not possible for them to love her more. That had comforted him, but even so, nothing could have fully braced him for the shock of meeting our daughter for the first time. The second Mercy had her fill of hugging me, she approached Dante. She didn't seem the least intimidated by the tall, solemn man that was staring at her with eyes that matched hers. She held up her hand in a wave, like he wasn't right in front of her. Hi, I'm Mercy. He lowered down to his haunches and tried very hard to smile for her. I'm Dante. Are you Scarlett's friend? Yes, her very best friend. I'm going to be her husband. Would you like to come to our wedding? She beamed at him. Can I dress like a princess? He nodded, still trying to smile. It was strained, but he got an A for effort. I had to look away and cover my mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. You can, he said, the words unsteady. If it's okay with your parents, we'd love for you to be the flower girl. Of course, Gina said, sounding less than steady herself. Mercy was thrilled and completely oblivious to our anguish. Also, she was an instant fan of Dante's. She'd always wanted to be a flower girl, she told him. What color do I get to wear? She asked him, sidling closer. Whatever color you want, he said. She clapped her hands. Can I pick more than one color? Of course, you can pick them all. And just like that, they were buddies. She wanted to sit by him at dinner. She wanted him to cut up her meatballs into little tiny pieces, and then her spaghetti. They were fast friends. It was hard to watch, but necessary. We stayed much longer than I normally did, and I knew without having to ask that this would be the new pattern. It was hours later, and Dante and I were sitting on the back porch swing, our hands clasped hard together, every finger entwined, hips glued like we were attached, watching Gina and Eugene dig through a large outdoor sandbox with Mercy. "It's so strange that we can just visit her like this," Dante said, his eyes on the mother of our child. "It is an open adoption." "That's what you wanted?" he stated. "It's not," I contradicted. "It's what she wanted. She thought, and thinks, since it was an option, that when the question arises, I should not be a mystery. We should not be a mystery. They are fans of total honesty. They want to keep no secrets from their daughter. It seems harder this way. The idea of her and the reality are two very different things." "Yes, harder indeed. As I've said, it's not what I wanted, but I didn't trust at the time, or even now, that what I wanted was what was best. I was wounded, am wounded, and I longed for the easy choice. But the fact is that there wasn't one, so I tried for the best choice, for her, her mother, and her mother I trusted to know what it was. Gina taught me what angels were, and that maybe, just maybe, Graham was right about prayers, that no matter your sins, sometimes life sends you the answer you need. Not the answer you want, perhaps, but need is the thing that matters most, no matter how it hurts. Epilogue. Scarlet. I dreaded going to visit my grandma, but I didn't put it off. Her time was limited, and I had enough regrets and guilt in my past that I'd learned not to add to it. Everything had happened very fast. The Durant men had made their move, maneuvered the first chess piece, gone after Adelaide, and the rest of the moves had come fast and vicious. Adelaide was arrested and charged for the murder of Vivian Durant. No bail was granted. It was a cold, cruel world when all of the Durant influence was suddenly being used against instead of for you. Her trial would be long and complicated, and no matter how it went, her reputation was forever in tatters. It was going kind of beautifully. More stakes had been nailed into Adele's coffin within hours of her arrest. 3 of her henchmen had been implicated and instantly turned on her. I ate up each piece of this news with absolute relish. Yum. At nearly the same time, Glenda turned herself in preemptively, confessing her rehearsed speech. Her spiffy, Durant-paid-for attorney brought her in and coached her through every word. She was charged and booked. Even her more expensive-than-God lawyer was surprised when she was granted bail. It was for $1 million, but that was small change in the world of Durant schemes. All of this made it possible for me to visit her in her new and sumptuously appointed apartment. She greeted me at the door solemnly, and I don't think either of us knew what to do. We'd never hugged, so that didn't seem right, but it felt like we should do something. We settled for nodding at each other, and then she showed me around her new house. "Nicest place I ever lived," she said. She sounded awful, old and sick. She looked it, too. "They even got a nurse checking in on me, helping me out every day. Never been treated like this before. Don't know what to do with myself, but mostly I just watch TV." I'd figured as much. The TV was on even while she led me around, as though she never even thought to turn it off. "You should try out a show called Kink and Ink, pure TV crack," I suggested. She told me, looking dubious about it, that she would. She made us tea, something I'd never even seen her drink, and we sat at her cute little dining room table and stared at each other. "I don't know what to say," I told her. "I'm still not sure why you're doing this for me." She stared at me, and while she did look awful, her gaze was more lucid than I'd ever seen it. Perhaps it was being terminal, but she seemed more human, more normal than I could ever remember. I owe you some words. I ain't good with words, but I'll try to explain myself. Bear with me. I nodded because she seemed to expect it. I've been homely my whole life, she said. You see me, homely and awkward. All the pretty girls at school always loved to make fun of me. I was an easy mark, mean enough, but no good at articulating it. And then one day, when I was 15, the most beautiful boy in town, his name's Vern Hahn, set about seducing me. I fell for him in about a second flat, but 2 weeks after he got me on my back, I heard the real story. He did it on a dare. He made $50 to sleep with the ugliest girl in school, and I got a broken heart and a baby out of it. All my life, pretty people been tormenting me, and all of a sudden, there I was raising one. She was a sassy little piece, too. Always knew she was better than me. Then she runs off soon she can, leaving me with her own pretty baby. And I took it all out on you. It wasn't fair, and the only defense I got is that the horrible things I said to you, the ways I brought you down, in my own twisted way, a lot of it was just my way of trying to guide you, to keep you from being like me. It didn't make it better. It didn't even make it okay. But it helped. At least now I had an explanation. At least now I knew that the way I'd been treated wasn't all me and my own defectiveness. And about that cop, she wasn't done talking. I didn't know. I just didn't know. But at the very least, I should have been the one to protect you. This is my way of making that right. That I didn't do my job. And she still wasn't done. It was the most I'd ever heard her talk in my entire life. I've been off the drink for a while now, she continued. It helps. Well, on some days it helps. I ain't as bad as I was. I know what I am. I know what I did to you. I'm an unpleasant, bitter woman. No one understands this more than I do. I was a terrible mother, and my daughter hated me for it. That hate made me cruel, and I took much of it out on you. I didn't mean to, but that's no excuse. You don't want anything to do with me, and I don't blame you for that. I'm doing this because it's the right thing. And for once in my miserable life, I want to do the right thing. Please don't try to take that away from me. And please consider letting it make up for some of the harm I've caused you. I had no clue what to say to that. My unbidden tears welled up in my eyes, and I'd never been so shocked as I was when I saw twin tears building up in hers. I have no right to ask anything of you. No right at all. But I just want you to know that if you ever wanted to visit me in these few months I have left, it would mean a lot to me. It doesn't have to be a long visit. I won't talk your ear off every time like I did just now. I just want to look at your beautiful face, to hear your voice, and even get a chance to tell you I love you a few more times. I can do that, I told her slowly. I'd like that, I amended. It was strange, us being nice to each other, but I was certainly on board if she was. And thank you for doing this. To be honest, I'm looking forward to the break. I'm sick of cleaning that rich bitch's house. We laughed hard. I tried to recall if she'd ever made a joke before, and couldn't come up with any. Still, it was a good start.
One word frees us of all the weight and pain of life. That word is love. Sophocles. Dante. Scarlet straightened my tie. You are so decorative. Arm candy. I'd take you over any bag. Well, that's reassuring, I said wryly, and she looked up and smiled. I wanted to kiss her head to toe, starting with her lush pink mouth, but I knew better than to screw up the makeup she'd just had painstakingly applied. She properly interpreted the look I was giving her and made a little noise in her throat. It didn't help. She took a step back, biting her lip. It was an effort, but I kept myself from going after her. My phone dinged a text at me, and I checked it surreptitiously, and smiled. Good. The night was going to be perfect. The surprise hadn't been hard to finagle. The owner of the casino that housed the Kink and Ink tattoo parlor was an old family connection, generations deep. I'd even met the famous James Cavendish several times, and we got along quite well. We had lunch whenever we were in the same city, as a rule. I'd passed the invitation to Frankie Abelli through James, and her response had come swiftly, a resounding yes. She was a huge fan of Stuart Wentley, and only too happy to attend one of his movie premieres. And Scarlett, being Frankie's biggest fangirl, she'd recently made me marathon watch the entire show with her, was going to lose her ever-loving mind. I couldn't wait. She'd dressed with utmost care for tonight. She looked edible, opulently beautiful, completely flawless and abundantly ravishing, sin-draped in sheer lavender Givenchy. This was her introduction to the world, and she was about to knock 'em dead, and it was about goddamn time. She was made for this. She'd left her hair down, and I couldn't keep my hands off it for long, nor my lips from her skin. I saved her makeup by focusing on her shoulders, her collar, her cleavage. There was way too much of her perfect flesh exposed, and I wasn't sure how I was going to make it through the evening without falling prey to her lavish charms. "Stop it," she said, her tone telling me that she wanted the opposite. "You're such a tease. We have to leave in like 5 minutes. "I can work with that," I told her sincerely. She threw her head back and laughed. It was flooring, spectacular. I'd been through hell and back more than once, just on the faith that I'd see it again someday. It was worth every second of suffering to be on this side of it, to see her smile every day, to hear that laugh. I'd do it again if I had to. Every bit of it for this. "Come here," I told her gruffly. She came, her eyes suspicious on me, but I just held her for a few drugging moments, lips at her hair, heart in her hands, soul joined with hers, in perpetuity. We were in the back of a limo that the studio had sent, headed to the premiere when I said, "I have a surprise for you." She shot me a saucy grin. "Is it oral?" That surprised a belly laugh out of me. "Is oral on the table?" "Only if you're doing it. You don't have any makeup to worry about." I started shifting lower in my seat, all too ready to accommodate her, but she stopped me with a hand and giggle. "I was kidding. You know I'm too nervous right now." "I'm pretty sure an orgasm will help with that." "You're incorrigible." "Yes," I said, tone succinct. "Also, I'm very good with my tongue." When I handed her out of the limo, she was only slightly mussed and much more relaxed. She took to the red carpet like a natural. A queen taking her throne. A goddess. Graham would have been so proud and not the least bit surprised. Just like me. I was just as Scarlett had said, arm candy. An accessory for the evening. I was fine with that. It was refreshing and stress-free in comparison to my usual social functions. I didn't have to conduct any business, didn't have to do much aside from stand close to the love of my life and smile for the camera. She really, sincerely disliked her co-star, and she made sure I stood next to him in several photos to illustrate how much taller I was. I was game. Any enemy of Scarlett's was on my shit list, as ever. "We heard you're engaged. When are you tying the knot?" was asked often, or some version of it. "As soon as I can drag her to a courthouse," I'd say, or "How late is Vegas open?" These answers were always met with chuckles, but the truth was I wasn't really joking. "Your surprise is here," I murmured into her ear when I spotted Frankie Abelli approaching. Scarlett's eyes twinkled mischievously up at mine. "I thought the killer limo oral was my surprise." "As tempting and accurate as that is, my oral is killer," Frankie said directly behind her. "I'm taken by this spicy little Brazilian babe on my arm." Scarlett turned, recognition lit her face, and she squealed in delight. Totally worth it. The women, all three of them, hit it off. How could they not after that introduction? I'm biased, of course, but the movie was brilliant. Scarlett stole every scene. There were a few parts that I had a hard time watching, a bit more skin than I'd have liked to share with the world, a lot more touching than I wanted to see, but I bore it in silence and with good grace. It was my issue, not hers. This was her art, her craft, and I'd be damned before I'd be the ass that told her how to express it. She'd always been one that took self-criticism to new extremes, but even she admitted that she was happy with her performance and with the movie as a whole. When the lights came on, she was watching my face, a grin on hers. There was a twist to her smile always, but just then, she was happy. As was I. "Scarlett Thoreau," I told her with quiet reverence, "I will love you to the end of my days. There aren't a lot of guarantees in life, but that is one of them." "I know, lover. I don't doubt it for a second. You've earned that."
They say marriages are made in heaven, but so is thunder and lightning. Clint Eastwood. Scarlett. For months, I'd waffled between wanting a huge wedding and wanting to say hell with it and just eloping. But Dante had promised Mercy that she could be a flower girl, and I really, really liked dressing up, so we settled for small but lavish. And most importantly of all, quick. We took a small entourage to an extravagant Durant property in southern Italy, and threw one hell of a party. I wore a champagne lace Givenchy number that made every other dress in the room have a small, intense orgasm as I passed by. And red Louboutins, of course. Because shoe porn. Leona was my maid of honor, Demi a bridesmaid. They'd both been even more shocked than I had when they found out about Farah. Shocked and disgusted. The girls hadn't even had to kick her out. She'd disappeared one night amid the Adelaide fallout. None of us heard from her again. Good riddance. Gina was my third and final bridesmaid. When I asked her to do it, she cried like I just granted her a wish. I still wonder all the time what I ever did to deserve such sweet, amazing people in my life. Bastian was the best man, but his fiancée was not invited. Just no, never. I was still waiting for her to die in a fire. I live on hope. The groomsmen were rounded out with Eugene and Anton. I was more surprised than anyone was when I introduced Dante to Anton, and the two men actually became friends. There weren't many attendees beyond the wedding party, and that was perfect for me. It was a beautiful, happy day, filled with laughter, friends, and love. We both had tears in our eyes as we watched our gorgeous little flower girl decorate the small path to the altar for us. But they were happy tears. Progress. Marriage is the most valuable, treasured friendship of your life, the officiate began. I won't lie, we barely heard the rest, but at least it was a strong start. Dante and I were having a moment, staring at each other, thanking the powers that be that in spite of everything, in spite of ourselves, somehow we'd ended up here, together, joined, whole again. Dante Durant, love of my life, I said at the end, still drowning in his ocean-deep eyes, my mascara a mess down my face. There aren't a lot of guarantees in life, But I promise you this. I will never lose my faith in you again. I saw in the way his face fell and lifted, the way his eyes melted at me, that I'd said the right thing, what he'd needed to hear, what I'd needed to say. It took me time to make peace with the decisions Dante had made, even after I'd come to understand them. He hadn't had a lot of choices, and his priority, as ever, had been to protect me. It took me longer to come to terms with the fallout I had caused as a result. Some wounds time couldn't heal. This I had always known. But what I learned, even as I learned what it meant to forgive, was that some wounds it could. It was a revelation to me. I had forgiven him, and he me. But perhaps most important of all, I had learned to forgive myself.
This has been Breaking Her, Love is War, Volume 2, written by R.K. Lilley. Narrated by Sarah Naughton and Jason Clark at Brickshop Audio, Inc. Copyright 2016 by R.K. Lilley. Production copyright 2016 by R.K. Lilley.
Audible